worked out pretty well.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to part two. We will start where we left off last time, which is with plot hooks and story seeds. So, obviously, plot hooks and story seeds are super important to any game that you run. The whole reason you run games, and they're the whole collaborative building of story that makes a game fun. So, important things that they do is they give players reasons to care because otherwise players just are disengaged. Um, they bait the hook with personal stakes, which goes back to what we were talking about in the previous part, where we talked about how in your session zero, you have a bit of a chat with players about their backgrounds and their stories and the relationship building, because you can immediately start to bait the hook after session zero with some of that information. So, um, yeah, session one can often be you can hit the ground running from what you've developed out of session zero. So they obviously give players reasons to care and bait the hook. Every story begins somewhere, but the best ones don't start with the world. They start with the actual characters. Um, the characters, generally in most games, whether it's D&D, Call of Cthulhu, whatever, Cult, whatever, they're hero-esque or, the champions of the game. So starting and building your stories and your plot seeds around the characters just makes sense. So a plot hook is a spark, a story seed is fertile soil, and together they grow into a campaign that players won't just follow, they'll fight for. So what is a plot hook? Plot hook is the narrative bait. So it is something that grabs the character's attention and demands action. So the best ones revolve around personal connection to the character, their past, their relationship, something they're interested in. Some examples I've given there are a stolen artifact, a vanishing noble, a mysterious letter with no sender, a prophecy that names a character's ancestor. It's important to note that a plot hook ties back to a character in some way. So the stolen artifact might be something stolen from the character's family. A vanishing noble might be a noble that's directly related to the character in some way. A mysterious letter with no sender is sent to someone the character knows or the character themselves. They're not just cool things, they're questions that itch. So they pull at the strings of the player and the character and opportunities that tempt them. So it makes them ask questions like, if we don't act, what happens? What's really going on here? Do I trust this contact or kill them? You get the idea. So hooks provoke curiosity, urgency, and moral dilemma, but they're even better when they actually feel personal to the player and the character. So what is a story seed? Story seed is a narrative element that may not sprout immediately, and that's what makes it a little different to the plot hook. These are things that blossom later in major arcs, side quests, character drama. Um, an NPC remembers a PC from their past, but not necessarily explained. A town festival that includes a dangerous, unexplained tradition. It piques the curiosity, but it doesn't immediately hook the players. Um, a fight where a villain who shows mercy. The players then are wondering if that villain escapes, wondering what that was all about. They're subtle. They're loose ends, odd coincidences, or emotional entanglements that you use to plant and grow over time. Um, Plot hooks are the immediate things that get to the characters and the players, but story seeds are often the things that blossom into something much bigger and more powerful and um, gets the players more emotionally involved over the longer term. So the trick is really simple. You don't explain a story seed straight away. You let the players pull at the threads. You let them wonder, even let them conjecture on the topic, and discussing after a session some of the things that happened is really, really useful to you as a GM for ongoing plot, because no matter how good we are as a GM, we can't think of all things, and players will come up with awesome ideas that you should plagiarize and steal. So there, I've said it. Yeah, because if the players think of it and they all think it's a cool idea, it is. So yeah, secrets. So making it personal. What I have learned over many years of GMing is if you make a plot or a seed personal to a player or a character, specifically a character, um, the emotional buy-in is massive. Players love to have their character be involved in something emotional. It's just the way humans are built. So, an example I've given you, or several examples, are it's one thing to say a village is under attack, but it's another to say your mentor's village is under attack. Immediately, just that one word draws the player in, particularly if they've spent a lot of time writing their background and saying how their mentor did this for them and their mentor did that. And I'm just picking on mentor because it's in the example, but you get what I'm saying. If you use a key point in a character's background, and just to be clear, characters' backgrounds don't need to be 15 pages long. It can be a paragraph. There's always something that you can pull. There's always some hook you can tie in. And often you can actually take it back to the character or the player and tell them and say, "Hey, how did your mentor disappear? What did happen to your mentor?" And allow them to build that story with you. So, you know, seeds and hooks, you should connect them directly to backstories, motivations. So often you'll have players that are motivated by something. You might have a D&D player in your current game who's motivated by greed, by treasure, by magic items. Tie it in. Tie in a plot or a story seed to that motivation. Find what it is through play or through talking to the players or session zero or after session discussions or even just during a session and make a note. You might be playing a session and you notice said character he's the last to leave the encounter and he slinks behind and he rifles through the chest that nobody else noticed and he just pockets the magical dagger that he finds. Beautiful. There you go. You've got a plot hook. You've got a story seed right there. What is that dagger? The character is obviously motivated by you know treasure. So what can you do? What relationships? Who do they care about? Does their backstory include a spouse or family or a faction they care about or someone they're tied to, or is it another player character? There's lots of things you can do around all of those things. And make a really easy thing to do that makes your games super cool is make sure that earlier decisions made by a character actually echo later in the plot. So if in session one you've had your player rescue an orphan, and save that orphan and what have you, helps them, helps them find somewhere to live in the village and they get adopted, whatever. Have that orphan return. Have that orphan appear later on. What if down the track, some trolls have attacked a wagon that was traveling to the city by merchants, and that little kid, that orphan, had got their first job as a guard or a cook or something on that cart on that trip, and all of a sudden they're kidnapped. Tie it back to earlier sessions, make things reappear. Everybody loves that stuff. So when the players feel that their character is the center of events, they go from spectators to co-authors of the story. One of the easiest tips, and we'll get to this later on, of player investment is make sure that they have an emotional buy-in at some point to the game you're playing. Practical hook and seed techniques. Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty a bit more. 3 hooks per arc. Always have a few hooks ready. One emotional, one urgent, one mysterious. What do I mean by that? So have a clear motivational, a clear emotional hook for a character ready to go. have a think once you've run your first session or you've done your session zero, and excuse me, and have an emotional hook. Is it a relative? Is it someone they care about? Is it a faction they care about? Is it a thing they care about? Have an urgent thing. Have something that has a sense of urgency. Their family member has been kidnapped. They've been kidnapped by some bloodthirsty monster. It's likely they're in serious trouble. Make it urgent, and have a mysterious hook. So have something that obviously isn't obviously urgent, but is emotional enough, or grabs hold of a player's attention enough that they want to look into it. And that could be a variety of things. That could be a really odd spell effect that happens around them or to them, or when they have an encounter with a goblin, they find that the goblin speaks multiple languages and all of a sudden casts some sort of spell and disappears and leaves behind some sort of clue that they can follow. So make it something mysterious. Seed without pressures. Don't force your players to follow every seed. They will not follow every seed, and the more seeds you have, and generally you probably go with a couple of hooks per player, um, they will not follow them all. However, and they might not even follow the most obvious seed that you plant, but they will follow one of them or a couple of them. So if they get ignored, maybe they die. If they don't, they could become a problem later on. You as a GM, that's where you get to have a little bit of fun. You might decide that because they haven't followed up on the fact that they know the local merchant's missing, you may have there may be a consequence of that. All of a sudden in town, everyone starts complaining that with the local merchant missing, all of a sudden they can't get things for a reasonable price. All of a sudden the players go looking for things for a reasonable price, and then you know you've got a full-blown story that's built out of something that they might have ignored. So NPC magnets, that's a really good one to follow up with. And that is create NPCs with desires, flaws, and secrets. These characters are living hooks that move the story forward on their own. It's important that player characters have a view on an NPC, love, hate, friend, or foe. If they go meh and don't care, then that's not the NPC you need to use as a plot hook or a story seed. If they have the local innkeeper who has thrown them out of their bar twice and they loathe him, he's one. He's one of those NPC magnets. Okay, if the PC's feel an emotion towards an NPC, then they become memorable, good, bad, or otherwise. Consequences as hooks. That's one that people often forget, and that is often a case of a classic example I've written here is players break a law, leave a villain alive or make a deal. But you can do a whole range of other things. That little orphan that they saved earlier on, what if the game has gone for a little while, maybe a year or two, and all of a sudden that little orphan who's decided that he's inspired by the paladin who saved him. He joins the local order and he becomes a squire to a local knight, and all of a sudden he becomes a resource for the players. He becomes an ally potentially, or the orphan was rescued, but the players didn't save his parents, and he blames them for that. All of a sudden, he's a villain, or potential adversary. So use those consequences to make hooks. So some examples of hooks and seeds by genre, and I've just given a couple of each. A dragon is sighted, but its scales are falling off. That's a hook. Bard's songs start predicting tomorrow's events. It's a seed. Distress call from a ship carrying a PC's old squad is a hook. A new AI in the party starts dreaming, a seed. You're getting kind of the idea as I'm going through these. A murdered girl calls one of the agents by name in their dreams, a hook. Every mirror in town shows a different sky, a seed. A corpse has the same tattoo as a party member, a hook. And a PC's old flame turns up with no memory of the seed. Look, sometimes you can find seeds become hooks and hooks become seeds. but generally a hook is an immediate think of fishing. Hook is immediately hooking the character, whereas the seed is something you plant and grows over time. So plot hooks ignite action. Story seeds keep the world alive. The best campaigns grow when these elements touch the hearts and wounds of the characters at the table. So cast your hooks with care, plant your seeds with wonder, and watch the story bloom. Do we have any questions? Let's open it up. Nothing? I'm having a look. Nope. All right, we will move on if there's no questions. All right. Balancing structure and sandbox. When to prep and when to improvise, giving choices without chaos. So structure to a story is the skeleton and sandbox is the soul. Campaign needs both to feel alive. If you have too much structure, the players feel railroaded. And by railroaded, for those who don't understand what I mean, it means where the players feel they have no agency. They're in a script that they can't in any way impact. And you probably have all played games like this. I know I have. Um, Too much sandbox and they're adrift. And what you get is players unsure of what the next thing is for them to do, which is fine, but can often lead to just players losing interest in a game. So your goal is to guide the story like a river, not a train track. And by that, I mean you let the story flow and ebb and move and meander, but you keep the guide rails on so that the players are still invested and still able to impact on the story and in fact guide it in some ways. So when to prep. So preparation gives your world depth, cohesion, and momentum. It's the infrastructure of your story. So I generally prep things like what will definitely happen, the villain's plan, the festival happening tomorrow, strange lights on the horizon. I try and anchor a tone. So that might be a recurring NPC, a signature location, a ritual that always plays out the same way, um, and support a choice. So have several NPCs or locations that react differently depending on what the players do. So let me give you a little glimpse into some stuff that I have written and work on. I don't know if you can see this or not, so please tell me if you can't. But this is my Stars Without Number game, and it is written in Obsidian MD. So can anyone see that? Yep. Okay, beautiful. So you'll see here, this is one of the factions that my players will eventually come across. And you will notice that I have done a bit of work around a variety of stuff. An overview of the faction, what happened after the Virion 9 destruction, which was the major planet they were a part of in the first session. What happens to this faction's goals and their influence after the Virion 9 is destroyed, where they operate from, whether they're allies or enemies. So I've written all the factions to allow the players to go either way depending on their own actions. So the emphasis here, and this is the meandering of the river rather than a railroad. I'm not saying that the Black Runners are going to be an ally of the players. I'm not going to say they're an enemy, but I'm saying that they could be either depending on what the players do. And this gives your players a real sense of agency, and it makes the game really alive for them because they know that their actions have a direct, there's a direct consequence depending on which way they go. A bit of a breakdown on their operation and fleet, my final thoughts on the role within the campaign. And I've literally done that with every faction that exists in that game. So that gives you a bit of an idea of how that goes. So Prep what matters, not what might not happen. Don't map the whole continent if they're just visiting a fishing village. Obviously, my game, the Stars Without Numbers one's a little bit different in that it's a bigger scale being in space, but same deal. Um, do know what the village elder wants, know what the villagers fear, and know what secrets lie beneath the chapel floorboards. So, for example, with that faction, I know what the goals of the faction are. I know what I've written, what is happening as to what sort of things they're taking over and what advantage they're taking, and what consequence of the main planet blowing up actually has on them. Because for some of the factions, it's catastrophic for them. Their power base is lost, that sort of thing. So, pro tip, pro tip. So when preparing encounters or role-playing scenes, many GMs are tempted to write out specific dialogue or rigid plot paths. It's okay to do that. However, players are unpredictable and pre-written conversations or fixed routes often fall apart the moment someone asks an unexpected question or takes a strange action, and it will happen. So instead of scripting outcomes, I define motives for the NPCs. What does the bartender want? Why is the cultist nervous? What does the villain want to say to the party that he's got tied before him before he executes them in his cunning plan? If you understand what drives the NPCs, you can improvise natural responses in real time, no matter how the conversation unfolds. And it will unfold in ways you haven't imagined. It always does. It keeps the interactions dynamic and makes the NPCs believable while reducing the burden of memorizing exact lines on the GM. So simply don't just map out what happens next. Define tensions, emotional, political, or moral forces pulling at the story. So that villain, does he hate the players so much? What is his goal from what he's doing? And what is his morality? Why has he just not killed them outright? Why has he allowed them to hear what his plan is? Give real motives behind what each of your NPCs do, and that will make them much more powerful. Perhaps the village elder wants to protect the town secret while the mayor needs outside help to stay in power. These are the tensions that help to make a game really, really good, and it's a really good pro tip to prep the situation and not script it. So, which brings us to improvising. So, when to improvise? Improvisation is when the magic happens, those unscripted, unforgettable moments that become player legend. And I'll just point out for those who didn't realize, when you do what I just said about with the pro tip about having motives, you are kind of scripting things a bit, but not in such a way that you're writing a script and reading lines. You're more scripting how the NPC is going to react. And that allows you much more flexibility on the improvised side because you're not hampered by a particular, 6-line thing you've written where the villain tells them about how his mother did this to him and that's why he became a villain, da 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 da. So you can improvise when the players make unexpected choices, which they always will. They talk to an NPC you never named. Yes, Gary the Goblin exists. They want to try something clever, chaotic, or genre breaking. If you ever run or play DCC with Brian, you'll know that chaotic is definitely one of the things that happens. Their actions push the story in new directions, and you don't want to say no, and that will happen a lot. Improvising, to be clear, isn't winging everything. It means trusting your instincts, using player ideas as fuel, and making confident choices in the moment. It also means taking breaks when needed. It's okay to take a 5-minute pause to collect yourself when something completely left of field happens that throws you off. And it does happen as a GM. It happens to the best of us, it happens to the worst of us. So it's okay sometimes to say, hey guys, let's have a 5-minute break. I need to go to the loo, and use that time to go and have a bit of a think and think, okay, so what am I going to do here? So Pro tip for that is to learn the improv mantra, yes and or yes but. In collaborative storytelling and role playing, either agree and build or agree with a cost. It's a technique that keeps the narrative flowing and the players engaged. So rather than shutting them down or shutting a player's ideas down or an action with a flat out no, the GM instead accepts it and builds on it, which is yes and, or introduces a consequence or complication, a yes but, which is my personal favorite, but I have used both and they both work really well. This approach validates player creativity while adding a new momentum to the scene. So, for example, if a player tries to bluff their way past a guard, the GM might say, yes, the guard believes you, but now he assists on escorting you inside. So the story advances, the tension remains, and the player got what they wanted, but at a cost. So both paths serve a vital function. They preserve agency, which is super important, and they maintain narrative motion. So they keep the story moving. So agreeing and building lets players feel empowered and heard, and agreeing with cost introduces stakes and creates opportunities for deeper role play, which is one of the reasons I really like the yes but. But again, the yes and is really, really useful as well. So in both cases, the scene stays alive and dynamic. This technique avoids dead ends, encourages improvisation, and helps everyone at the table feel like they're contributing to a living, breathing world, even when things don't go quite the way anyone expected. So this brings us to giving choices without chaos, the illusion of infinity. So open worlds feel bigger than they are because you frame choices clearly. So you let players choose their direction, but define the stakes and the outcomes. Yeah, you can investigate the warehouse tonight, meet the contact at dawn, or follow the black car right now. Each leads somewhere, but which is more important to you? This technique gives player agency. It makes it the forefront. The players have a choice. Which do you want to do? Do you want to go to the warehouse? Do you want to meet the contact? Or do you want to follow the black car right now? The players feel like they have a say. But as a GM, you've prepped. What happens if they go to the warehouse? What happens if they meet the contact at dawn? And what happens if they follow the black car right now? They may all lead to the same thing. They may not. They may lead completely different ways. But the thing here is the players have a choice. So another example is you can join the court intrigue or take the back door to the Undercity. The first earns power, the second earns freedom. Let the players choose. Creates really meaningful choices for the players, but not overwhelming options. You got to be really careful and this is the difference between a complete sandbox and a structured sandbox. A complete sandbox, you don't give the players those three choices. You say to the players, what do you want to do? And they go, and one guy goes, well, I just want to go home and see my wife and have dinner. And another player goes, well, I want to do this. And another player, and you can still make that work. You can still make the story have a part, but in a way, you're making it harder on yourself. So give the illusion of choice, but be aware that it allows the players a real sense that they are still driving the story along. Which brings me to the point I was trying to make. Too many choices can paralyze. Too few can frustrate. So generally, a sweet spot I've found over the years is 2 to 4, clear contrasting paths. So by that I mean 2 to 4 clear different paths. So you saw on the previous example, you had one going to the warehouse, one meeting a contact at dawn, and one following a car straight away. The warehouse one was sort of an intermediate action. Contact at dawn was kind of a wait and then do something. And then the black car is an immediate action. You're not saying to players, you can't do that. What you're saying is you can do all these things, but here's what that choice means. So you make every choice have a consequence. So going back to structure, structure equals setup, sandbox equals payoff. You use structure to create conflicts, timers, factions, mysteries, and promises. So let's just identify those for a sec. A conflict is anything that the players feel um, gives them some form of challenge. So that could be a physical challenge, combat. That could be an emotional conflict between a family member and a player or character. Yeah, anything that gives the players a challenge is considered a conflict. Timers, and when we get to pacing, we'll talk about timers in more detail. Timers are super useful to really drive a pacing and tone of a game. When I ran the first session of Stars Without Number, I told them from the very first scene that the last spaceships were leaving and they had 4 hours before the planet was going to explode. Straight away, there is a feeling of time. And what I would do over the course of that first session is I would every so often had a dice sitting on the table that was set to 4 to start with. Every so often I'd turn that dice and I'd turn it to 3. And the players knew within the first turn of the dice that I was counting down. And every hour that went by gave a much more tension and motivation to that session. So timers are super good. Factions, as you saw with my Obsidian for Stars Without Number, setting up factions is super important. If you're going to run any sort of game that involves factions, and you should, factions are great, you need to make sure you understand what the factions are trying to achieve. You don't have to detail every thug, every grunt, even every boss in a faction. But what you do need to define is what is the faction trying to do. Mysteries. It's always good to have some structure around mysteries. One of the most pleasurable things as a GM that I find is having mysteries that players never know or find out over the course of many sessions. Mysteries are a lot of fun, but you need to set them up early. So you need to have a concept, you need to have an idea. You don't need to have all the answers to it. Sometimes it's really good to let player agency play a part in that and let players have some conjecture over what a mystery is. And often you'll change a mystery to add in some of the things they thought that it might be. And promises. Promises are rewards. Promises are uh, the reasons why you might run a story. So a promise might be that you're running a D&D game where the entire promise is to save the local villagers from this castle that has appeared out of nowhere and all the villagers have disappeared into it. So the promise is the promise of saving them and getting the village back to normal. I'll talk more about them later on, but yeah, promises are good. And then you let the sandbox deliver the player-driven consequences. So what the players do, how they resolve that conflict, how they react to that timer, how they deal with factions, how they follow a mystery, and how they work towards the promise. Surprising solutions is another thing that the sandbox helps deliver, and it often comes out of player-driven consequences. Emergent drama, how the players deal with the scene, again, is driven out of that. And unexpected alliances or betrayals, which will and can and should happen. And sometimes the best ones of those are the ones where the villains become an ally. So your job isn't to control the story. It's to load the world with dynamic tension and let the players be the spark that sets it ablaze. Too often, and I've been guilty of this many times in the past, too often you'll write a story and you'll build this fantastic story, and then in the very first session, the players will do something and completely destroy your story. Because what you need to do is load the dramatic tension, have an overall idea of what the story is, but put more time into the motives of the NPCs, more time into what factions are trying to achieve, more options into a timeline of how you think events will happen, and then what happens is the sandbox then allows you to modify those things. So, final thoughts. A railroad tells the story you want, but a sandbox tells the story they want. What's the sweet spot? It's a structured sandbox, a living world with friction, fate, and freedom. So you prep like an architect, you improvise like a jazz musician, and you let the players make the song unforgettable. Do we have any questions?
Yeah. Do you
Yep.
tend to railroad like your early sessions to give your players like the feel for what you're doing and then sort of let it turn into a sandbox?
No, I never, ever, ever railroad players. I have been doing this far too long and been been a GM for far too long to ever do that. I loathe playing in games where I am railroaded myself, so I just will not do it. I have a general concept. So, for example, I'll go back to Stars Without Number. I have a general concept of what I think the first session will be, but it is completely open to the players completely destroying that if necessary. So, for example, even though I had the idea that they had to get off world in 4 hours, if the players had have refused that, I had a backup plan. So my backup plan was that they were actually going to find out from someone, somehow, some way, that the bit of alien architecture called the core nexus, that is what actually detonated to destroy the planet, is actually something they can get to. And then I would have changed and pivoted the adventure to allow their actions to have a direct impact on whether the core nexus still detonated and exploded the planet, or if they actually saved the planet, which they could have done. So, um, Al, what do you do if you have a group of players who are great at going off on tangents and walking past your backups? Yeah, that's that's a really, really good one. And that comes down to that those motivations, really getting to understand the players and the characters in that session zero. So it's really rare that you would find that you can't find something that will hook one of those players or characters, some sort of motivation, no matter how minuscule it might be in that first session. Um, yeah, I hope that answers your question, but it really comes down to that first session, listening to the players and getting them to talk about what they want to achieve from the game. Because often you'll get all the hooks and things you need right from there. When players turn up and say, "Look, I'm after a really role play heavy game. I'm really my character is a he's a bartender who really loves to hear people's stories, and that's because his own life's been quite tragic. You know, first session, you get some mysterious woman in there who's talking to the bartender and telling him about her dead husband and how he's done this and how he's done that and how he looks like her dead husband, and you can do all these things. So, uh, yes, thanks, Pat. It was a huge switch, but you need to be prepared that even your best laid plans will be derailed. So you do have to have a concept of what if the players go outside of what even broad sandbox guidelines. So I like to make sure in Cyberpunk that players have corpse or someone on their tail driving them to get money or just move location. Really, really good motivator. You can use that in a variety of games, whether that be an ally or a benefactor in D&D, whether it's corpse in Cyberpunk, whether it's the computer in Paranoia, whether it's their Lord and Liege in Pendragon. You can use NPCs in a variety of ways to drive them. Um, yeah, yeah, that's a really good point to make. Is there any other questions around structure and sandbox and plot seeds? No. All right, let us push on. So, section 3, the art of session flow. And I'm going to indulge you with a story once again. The bell tolls twice. The train screeches to a halt at Kennett's Hollow Depot, steam curling around the platform like grasping hands. The clock tower strikes 3, then again, as if correcting itself. A second chime that feels somehow closer. It is summer, allegedly. But here the trees are bare and the air smells faintly of copper and spoiled fruit. Locals shuffle past without greeting. One stares, doesn't blink. You arrive with a letter in your coat pocket, creased, desperate, written in a shaky hand. They come through the walls now. Something in the hollow watches. Bring salt, bring light, bring no mirrors. The road to Chapel Street is downhill and crooked. Houses lean towards the street like eavesdropping neighbours. Shutters are closed despite the hour. A weather vane spins in the still air. The professor's house waits at the end. The gate is open. The door is not. Inside, mildew, candle wax and ozone. The hallway creaks beneath your feet like something breathing. You call his name. No answer. The study door hangs half open, trembling slightly on its hinges. Inside, overturned books, ink on the walls, salt circles broken across the floorboards. A reel-to-reel recorder ticks in the corner, still spinning, hissing softly. No sign of a struggle. No sign of the professor. No sign of anything living. Until the tape clicks. Static turns to breath, then a voice, not quite human, not quite wrong. If you're hearing this, it's too late. It isn't in the house. It's under the town. The hallway door slams. The window shutters close. And beneath the wallpaper, something scratches. Session pacing. Pacing is the difference between a session that lingers in memory and one that drifts away into boredom. It's the music behind the narrative, the flow of tension, release, and curiosity that keeps players leaning forward in their chairs. Think of pacing as your ability to control time and focus at the table. You choose when to zoom in, when to skip ahead, when to build dread, slowly, and when to let it explode. Done well, pacing makes the story feel effortless, like the dream the players don't want to wake up from. The story on the previous screen was an example of pacing. You'll notice that I started slow, building up a sense of dread until something happened. And then click, click, click. It all went faster. Scene framing. Start where it gets interesting. Too many GMs start scenes with characters waking up, ordering food, or walking across town. I'm guilty of it. We all are. Cut that. Start in the heat. Skip to the moment something is at stake. A knock on the door, a scream from the alley, a letter in the dead of night. Use the late in, early out method, where scenes enter scenes after the boring bits but leave before the players exhaust them. Frame scenes with a clear question or tension. What's really in the box? Why is the ambassador smiling like that? Who's missing from the town square? It's a really, really powerful tool for a GM to use to start scenes in a completely different way to what the players expect. So I'll go back to Stars Without Number. Very first scene, players are at the spaceport, big crowds, people milling about, people pushing, shuttles taking off. All of a sudden, the world's ending. What are the players going to do? Right? Start your scenes with important points, and you'll get buy-in straight away from the players. They'll immediately start to go, hang on, what's going on here? So tempo changes, control the speed of emotion. Okay, so pacing isn't about speed, and I need to be clear on that. It is about rhythm. So a good session ebbs and flows. Call of Cthulhu, classic example. Combat scenes should go fast. They should be fast. They should be dynamic. They should be chaotic. They should be urgent. They should be dangerous. Scenes where a Call of Cthulhu character is researching in a library should be slow, should be calm, should be peaceful. And then slowly, as that character is researching something horrific, there's a sense of urgency and dread and a build-up of emotion and a build-up of speed until something happens. So you use fast scenes for combats, arguments, explosions to create an adrenaline and an urgency. You keep the description tight. You push the players to act quickly. It's okay to give players time limits. In fact, it works really well. And we'll get to how to stop combats from dragging, but in games like Pathfinder and D&D, don't be scared to skip hit points. Allow the villain to lose their hit points quickly and don't necessarily keep track of it. Um, keep combats tight. Sometimes fudge, how much damage a player will have done to them. Push the players, get them to act quickly, make sure that there is a sense of urgency. If you've got a player sitting there in a combat or a fast scene and they're sitting there dawdling, make a consequence. Give them a time. Have a dice in front of you. Have it set to 6. Turn it over every 6 seconds. If they don't respond by the time it's to 1, there's a consequence, right? Use slow scenes, investigations, campfire talks, discoveries to let the emotions breathe. Let the players rest sometimes. Let them have a slow scene. Let them have a fun scene. Sometimes Call of Cthulhu, it amazes me the amount of people that don't include comedy in it. When the players are safe, allow them to be players, allow the characters to be characters, allow them to have a bit of comedy, allow them to unwind, allow them to feel safe. It just makes it all the more impressive when they're not. So ask reflective questions. Let the silence linger. Use the senses. By using the senses, I mean describe. Describe what's around them. You know, you can set so much of whether a scene is fast or slow with descriptions. People moving quickly through the street, wind blowing through the trees, leaves, buffeting the players all the way down to sitting beside a campfire and um, having the flames just flicker slowly in the background and the warmth washing over the players. You can do all sorts of stuff to create tempo using the senses. Uh, I'll get to your questions in a minute. In fact, no, I'll do cliffhangers first, and then I'll come back to your questions. So the power of the unfinished moment. Cliffhangers. Cliffhangers are pacing tools, not just story tricks. They keep momentum burning between sessions and across scenes. You use cliffhangers to end sessions with a bang. The vault door opens and you see what's inside, but it's moving. Cut away mid-scene. As you lift the mask off the body, we jump to the other group. Delay resolution. You fire the gun, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Cliffhangers are great. You need to make sure cliffhangers can be really powerful, but they can also go really wrong if you cut at the wrong moment. If you're going to cut on a big scene and at the start of a big fight, cut before the fight happens. Don't open the door and see the lich and have him sprout his massive big, his rhetoric that you've been planning for 4 sessions. Stop at the door. Stop at the door and let the players for a session think what's behind the door, what's going on here, what's happening, and then start your next session with that big climactic moment, and it leads into combat, or it leads into an emotional discussion between the players and the villain, or what have you. Cliffhangers are great. So momentum control, keep the story moving. So even in a sandbox, the story must move on. If nothing changes, the world feels dead. If everything changes too fast, it feels chaotic. Remember what I said early on about in part one about timelines? Timelines help you drive your momentum and help you keep your momentum under control. Even if they're just the most broadly painted timeline, have one. Have one for every session you run, a clear timeline of what is going to happen and when. And if the players don't get to that warehouse by the time the kidnapped person was going to be killed, there's a consequence. So manage momentum by tracking unresolved threads and nudging them forward. So you've got a couple of threads, you've got a couple of story seeds, you know, the players haven't followed them. What is the consequence? What happens if the players didn't follow them? Does it somehow move towards the villain that they're ultimately going to fight being stronger? Maybe. Does it hinder the victim, the villain, because they didn't follow it? Maybe. That's up to you to decide and you to put in your story. But track any unresolved threads that you feel are important and make sure that there is a consequence one way or another. Give players meaningful options, but limiting them to 2 to 4 clear paths. We've discussed that earlier. Make sure that players have a couple of options. Do not give them one single railroaded option. It's just not fun. Ask leading questions. Where are you headed next? Who do you think is behind it? Allow the players to give you plot, give you seeds. Ask them lots of questions. Sometimes the most innocuous question to a player will give you the best storyline you've ever had. So really, really, I encourage you to ask lots of questions and don't be weird about it. Don't ask questions about everything and write down everything, but make sure that sometimes you do. Make sure that not every question is a question that might lead to plot, but every question has the potential to lead to plot, if that makes sense. So, final thoughts on pacing. Pacing is invisible when it's done well. Players do not notice it. What they do notice is they had a hell of a time. That Call of Cthulhu session they had went from being a slow burn to being absolute mayhem. And at the end of the session, they're gasping and going, how the hell did we survive that? It's felt in the tension before a die roll and the silence before a question, in the gasp at the end of a session. Master pacing and your game will sing. And I cannot tell you more than anything else, this is the most important thing in running a horror game. If you run Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, you must master pacing. It will make your games go from being, yeah, okay, that was a lot of fun, to being, oh my God, and they're still talking about it 6 months later. Stumble and even the most brilliant story will fall flat. So frame tight, change tempo with care, and end strong. As a GM, if you're running a game that pacing is required for, and most games are, make sure you include that in your planning. Make sure you include pacing in your timeline. So by that I mean when you write the sequence of events that you think are going to happen or are going to happen, and if the players, they can influence them, whatever, also include in that timeline what the pacing is. Is this combat going to be fast? Is it going to be super slow? Sometimes you can really throw players out by changing pacing, making a combat a real drudge, a real, slow combat can really change the way players feel. And it actually sometimes, and I wouldn't do it all the time, but it actually can make sometimes the players get really weary of getting into combat. So be aware of that. All right, I'll take some questions and I'll start with Ant's first one. How do you manage pacing in combat when players are struggling to figure out what to do or how a certain spell works? Okay, pretty easy. And when I say pretty easy, I'm saying that from years and years of experience. If they don't know what to do, put a timer on them. Players, they will respond with something, or for the very first time, they won't respond at all. And guess what? A consequence will happen and they will respond the second time. Where are we? Or how a certain spell works. Get them to tell you what the spell works. So remember we said early on, I think it was in session one, part one, about making a call and adjudication. Make a logical call. If you think a spell works a certain way, say, hey, to keep things moving, this is what I'm going to say is going to happen. We'll review it at the end of the session and see if that's right or not. Keep it moving. How would you approach a situation where one player continuously interrupts pacing? Can you give me a bit more of an idea of what you mean by that, Liana? How are they interrupting pacing? I hope you're typing. Beautiful. All right, I'll wait for your response. I'll wait for your actual response, but in the meantime, I'll just sort of discuss it. So, how would you approach a situation when one player continuously interrupts pacing? Consequence. Consequence is the best way. If a player is being too slow or a player is being too fast, have a consequence. Um, an example, player is rushing combat. Have a consequence of them having rushed, and yeah, have a consequence of where they rushed means that they miss a vital clue that perhaps another player picks up on. Perhaps the villain was actually holding back. Perhaps perhaps there is something about the environment that the player has missed because they're going too fast. If they're going too slow, maybe they didn't get their turn off in time, and somebody else gets to go before them, and they you took the words out. Yeah, okay, beautiful. Yeah, so it's all about consequence, right? Players respond to consequence. So be less approachable. Yeah, players respond to consequence. When the players understand that your game has pacing and that things happen with some sort of pace, whether it be fast or slow, depending on the scene, they respond. So they might get caught out the first time. You may even get someone do it the second time. You'll rarely get someone do it the third time. Like, really, you won't. All right. Any other questions on pacing? It almost is. It almost is. I try to avoid that analogy, but yeah, parenting, GMing, parenting, yeah, there's similarities for sure. All right, let us continue. We've got a little bit more time. Let's try and get through at least one more. Spotlight management, ensuring everyone gets moments to shine, even the quiet ones. So, an RPG session isn't a monologue, it's an ensemble cast drama, part improv theatre, part dream logic, part chaos ballet. And yeah, it can very much be all three of those. Every player, every character deserves their time under the stage lights. So, spotlight management is your artful ability to shift focus around the table, ensuring every player feels seen, valued, and narratively impacted. Because when only one or two players dominate the story, the others fade. And when that happens, so does the magic. Honestly, you lose players. Players disengage, they end up getting on their phones, they just do not feel like they are a part of the story, and you lose them. So, balance the light, guiding your narrative focus. Every scene encounter or even a quiet moment is an opportunity to steer the light. Don't let the loudest voice always lead. Listen for the silences. What does that mean? Don't, when you go around the table, make sure to include the silent and the quiet people with what they're doing. Don't always let the loudest person be the focus. Sometimes what that will involve you doing is turning away from the loudest person and asking a direct question to another player. It's an okay thing to do. You're not being rude. What you're doing is sharing the limelight. So if one character is talking to the king, what is everybody else doing? Um, break away from the scene. Use a cliffhanger to cut away from the moment where that character has actually pissed the king off, and find out what the cleric is doing in the corner, who's been watching this going the whole time and is being approached by the prince. In combat, don't just call out damage. Describe what each action looks like. Let them be cool. Um, allow the players, allow even the quiet players to describe how did that hit go. Okay, you're a paladin. You've just hit the undead creature. How did you hit it? What did you hit it with? Where did you hit it? Give even the quiet players the chance to have their moment of cool. Let them describe what they did. Um, use initiative, use role play or puzzles to invite participation. Don't gatekeep it. Invite everyone to participate. You know, get the loud player fighting off the ghouls that are attacking the party, while the quiet player is under an enormous amount of stress, attempting to work out how to open that locked door for the party to escape as they see more of the ghouls coming down the corridor. Um, think of your game like a spotlight sweeping across the stage. Your job isn't to keep it on any one actor, but to light the entire cast in turn. It is more than anyone. This is one of the reasons I dislike games that don't have GMs. It doesn't work, in my opinion, for quiet players. Um, when you have a GM, it allows the GM to guide the overall balance of the story and provide quiet players with their moment to shine. You don't have that, you don't have it. Oh yeah, there's games without GMs. Quite a few modern games go along that narrative, and they're not my favorite things for a variety of reasons, one of which I've just explained. Um, so know your players, recognize engagement styles. This goes back to session zero. Not everyone wants the spotlight in the same way. Some players love to give a grand speech and be the center of attention, and they often play bards and other things like that. But others love quiet character moments. That quiet character moment where the guy who's the blacksmith who doesn't say much builds his own magical longsword, or give these players their moments. Some will initiate role play in a group, others wait to be invited. You will know pretty quickly which players will start role play and which players will wait for you to engage them with role play. There's nothing wrong with having the party leader discussing something with the mayor and have an urchin come up and talk to the quiet mage and slip him a magical gem that has been given to him by someone else with a message that then plays out to the quiet character, right? The very best role players, even if they're extroverted, pull other players along with them. So one of the things I encourage you to do, and I'm not going to discuss it too much here, but if you are an extroverted role player, really look at bringing other players along with you. One of the things I try and do when I'm a player always is I try and get other players involved. And that might be something simple like my character plays a joke with them, on them, with them, on them, whatever. My character might involve them in what I'm doing. So I might be, and I'm thinking Piotr here, I might be going into a sailor, a very dodgy looking sailor's bar in the middle of the docks, and I might drag along a certain doctor with me. Those bring players with you. If you're an extroverted player, bring other players with you and encourage, as a GM, encourage the extroverted players to do that. Often it builds camaraderie and it gives everyone the spotlight, because all of a sudden, the extroverted players that are stealing some of the spotlight are dragging someone along with them and exposing them to it as well. So some shine in mechanics, others in emotion. Be aware, some players are really, really good at the mechanical side of things. Making a really cool character out of the mechanics of a game. Playing RuneQuest and making this earth rune worshipper of Orlanthi that has all these cool abilities. Others build it from emotion. You might have this truly tragic vampire character, or as I've heard, a really cool nun vampire character, that has this whole thing going on around children and stuff. So allow the players to shine where they shine. Yeah, I know you got that one. The key is to understand how each player engages and then give them tailored opportunities to thrive. This is what makes a really good GM. Really, really, really understand what makes your players tick. If you can do that, you'll always run really good games. It can be hard sometimes, particularly if you don't know people or you've got new people, but you can generally start within a few minutes of play, working out if they're quiet, if they're engaged, if they're an emotional player, if they're a mechanical player. You can normally pick it up within a period of time. So use that, make some notes, and then tailor what you're doing according to that player. So pro tip, ask between sessions, what kind of moments do you enjoy the most? Then build scenes to reflect that. I do have I'll see if I can find it. I do have a GM questions. I don't know. Can you guys all see that? Yes. Okay, beautiful. So this is what I put together and give out to my Stars Without Number players. And at the end of every session, I make sure I finish 10 minutes odd early. No, you can't see it. Or you can see it. Player questions? Yes. Okay, cool. Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah, so what I do is at the end of each session, now this bit is not quite right for this game. So what I do is I actually give them an experience point for each question they answer. They can answer any question they want up to 3. That's my GM explanation of what all the questions are. But simple things. What was a pivotal moment for your character this session, and what does it reveal about their core values and beliefs? Did your character make any decisions that surprised you, and what does this reveal about hidden aspects of their personality? In what ways did your character grow or change during the session, and what experiences promoted this development? What goals was your character pursuing, and how did their actions help or hinder their progress? How have recent events influenced your character's worldview or beliefs about others in the game world? What is your character's next significant goal, and what lengths are they willing to go to achieve it? And how does your character perceive their companions and the group's dynamic after this session? I ask them to answer 3 questions. They can answer 1, they can answer 2, they can answer 3, they can answer none if they want. But really, what this does for me as a GM is it gives me fuel. It gives me fuel to know what to use to trigger each of those characters in the sessions that are coming. It allows me to write plot hooks. It allows me to write seeds. And you know what? The players give me it all. They give me the whole lot by answering these questions. I make really, really simple notes about what each player says, and I build that into what I'm building. I add that in somewhere, add it in somewhere, anywhere. All right. I use it to work out what their motivations are. I use it to write plot. You don't need to be the sole person driving it all. As a GM, you want to be a good GM, make sure the players help you build the plot. So that's my player questions. I'll get rid of that. All right. Tools and techniques to share the spotlight. I'm mindful of time, so I'll try and get through these quickly. Reflective questions. Direct specific questions to quieter players to draw them in. How does your character feel watching this unfold? You notice something others miss. What is it? What memory does this place stir in you? All questions that will get a quiet player involved. Design personal moments. Drop NPCs from a character's past in the scenes. Create side quests based on their goals, views, or history. Let them be the key to solving a problem. An ancient art dialect, only they speak. Stars Without Number. I got a doctor on a ship that's got a plague. Immediately drawn into it, right? So all of this stuff, my questions, that I ask at the end of a session, help me for the next session, right? So mechanics with meaning. Let niche abilities shine. The rogue's got an ear for lies. Let him uncover a traitor. Cleric's obscure love, obscure law saves the town, right? If somebody tells you they've made this character and he's got a really niche thing or whatever, include the niche. You don't have to make it a major plot point, but include it somewhere. Make the character feel like they haven't just created this odd thing that they'll never use. Include it, and sometimes include it in the most bizarre way you can. That just adds to the fun. Offer decisions that require a character's moral compass or unique skills. I love role playing games that challenge me as a human. I like one of the reasons when I use safety tools, I literally never tick anything. I will play anything that challenges me as a player. Make sure you're careful with your players around that and obviously use the safety tools, but challenge them. If there's a fight and they're a D&D classic example. You're killing all these orcs, da 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 da. What happens when you stumble across an orc nursery that's being guarded by old orc women? Do they slaughter them? Do they not? The orcs aren't inherently evil at a young age, are they? Or are they? Make it a moral quandary. Sometimes they can create the best role playing moments when you push players in ways they perhaps didn't expect. Pass the mic. In group scenes, go around the table intentionally, especially during planning or emotional moments. Do not let one player talk over all the others. You can go back to the questions I said earlier in part one. One person is saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do something else. Turn around to that another player and say, what do you think about that? Are you happy with going with this course of action? What do you think is the best way to move forward? During an emotional moment, allow a quiet player to say no. Allow them to step up and say, no, I don't want to do that. That doesn't sit well with me. Give everybody their chance at the spotlight. Um, Too often for new GMs, they just allow the most loudest player to ride the pony, to be the one that takes the spotlight. Make sure you give everybody a question. As the GM, you have a unique ability to say, "Cool, thanks for your view on that. What do you think?" and ask someone else. Okay, nobody else at the table generally gets to do that, so make sure you use that power. Um, if someone's dominated the last two scenes, look elsewhere next. Do not make that person the dominant person in the next scene. Okay? Even if you've got to tailor it. Make somebody else the dominant person. I'm very mindful as a player that I can be a bit dominating in games. I purposely will not go more than a scene being the main character. I will try and step out and let other players play. Just because that's the kind of person I am when I play, I can be a bit domineering and overbearing, and I'm aware of that. So don't allow any one person to dominate more than two scenes. All right. Spotlight management isn't about taking attention, it's about giving it away with intention. So making sure you intentionally give another person their moment in the sun. So what about the quiet player? Some players don't want a spotlight. They want a lantern, a warm glow, a space to speak when ready, and a chance to matter without pressure. To support them, let them prepare their moment. Don't rush. If you ask someone, what do you think? And they go, oh, I don't know, or I need more time, give them that. Move to the next person. Create one-on-one scenes where others are resting, shopping, or researching. Yeah, cool. So when that really loud, boisterous player is off doing, having their moment in the sun, cutscene, cutscene. You got the guy who's standing with the horses, standing there quietly, looking at the horses, and all of a sudden he realizes, hey, there was that scepter that we thought we lost, and this player's taken it. What's going on here? Right? Give them their moment. Give them their moment. They don't have to be doing anything particularly amazing, but give them a moment to shine. You'll often find that they'll go and run with it and do something really cool. So send their character a secret letter, a dream, a vision, something just for them. There's nothing wrong with planting a seed for something obscure and mysterious and giving it to the quiet character and letting them have their own little quiet, self-satisfying moment where they're sitting there while everybody else is doing their thing and they've got this vision or dream or letter or something and they're just holding it to their chest and going, what am I doing with this? This is cool. This is my thing. So affirm their contributions after they speak, build on their ideas, show that it has impact. Allow the quiet players when they speak to have just as much impact as everyone else. It's not about it's not about muting the loud player and making the quiet player the focus. It's about making everyone the focus. So make sure everybody when they speak, they have an impact. Doesn't need to be loud, just needs to be meaningful. That's it. So final thoughts. Spotlight isn't a reward for performance. Too many GMs do that. Do not do that. It's not a reward for performance. It's a gift of presence, a chance to be part of the story's heart. Manage it with care, share it generously, and you'll see something beautiful, players lifting each other up. And that's really what you want. Characters growing in ways they don't expect. Table full of people who feel like heroes, even if they're broken, scared, or hunted by ancient things that should not be. Any questions? And that brings us to 8:48. So let's go. I don't think we've got any questions. All right. Okay, hit me up with your questions. Okay. Anyone has a talking question while that one gets written up? Nope. So hopefully I've helped to make it a little bit clearer about Spotlight and making sure that everybody shares their moment in the sun. It's really important to have an enjoyable space at the table for everyone. I mean, I know we talk about inclusivity and all that, and that's super important. But yeah, it's really important to share the spotlight over a session with all the players or as many players as you can. And if you don't spotlight a player in a session, make a note of it and make sure that that they get the spotlight first thing next session. So make sure that they get that. I do have another section I can do if people want me to continue, which will be combat that doesn't drag. Is everybody happy for me to continue with this one?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. All right. Well, I will try and get through this and then we'll probably call it here because otherwise I could go on forever. My question is kind of end of mentor session. Okay. Yeah. Oh, end of mentor. Okay. So you want to ask at the end. That's fine. Yeah. You can write it up and then we'll be ready to go at the end. So I'll move on. So combat that doesn't drag, dynamic environments, goals beyond kill everything. There will be more next week, Pat. I'm not very far through. I've probably got another 3 sessions or so of this at least. So dynamic environments, goals beyond killing everything, keeping it cinematic. Dynamic environments, goals beyond, yep, okay. Combat should be a highlight reel, not a spreadsheet. I know some of us play games, and I'm looking at you, Pathfinder 2 and D&D, that involve a lot of number crunching. But as a GM, if you're going to run those games, cool, no sweat, but be a bit flexible in how you go about it. Don't be so wound up in the numbers that you miss the ability to make a combat cool. Combats in those kinds of games, and I'm not bagging those games in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying combat in those sorts of games, and even back in the day, Rollmaster is another good one, can really drag out. Yeah, no problem, man. They can really drag out if you don't if you don't keep things moving. So it's not about how long the combat lasts, it's how alive it feels when it's running. So the moment you feel the combat is dragging, you should do something. When the combat flows well, it's exhilarating. When it bogs down, it feels like the story just stopped and everyone's waiting to do 12 points of damage, right? It just becomes that number crunching chore. So here's how to make it pulse with drama, decision making, and cinematic flair. Use dynamic environments. Let the world fight too. I have a pet hate of 30 by 30 stone rooms. They are the silent killers of excitement. They are the they are the marsh that drags players and GMs down into boredom, right? Make your battlefield a character in its own right. A crumbling bridge during a thunderstorm, shifting fog that conceals or reveals enemies, burning tavern with collapsing beams every round, gravity going sideways in a ruined alien spaceship, cultists chanting a ritual with the walls pulsing with light. Make the players think about where they fight, not just what they fight. Even the most bland D&D, Pathfinder, Rolemaster combat can be made exciting by adding in just a couple of cool elements to an environment. Make the floor slippery from oil that's been spilled because they're using the oil to create some sort of I don't know, they've been filling lanterns or something. Make the area difficult and unique and a pleasure to fight in, something where they can turn back and say, "Do you remember the time we fought on the top of that ship and it was covered in oil and we were sliding everywhere?" Make it memorable. Because they're the fights they're going to remember, not the fight where the guy, took 462 points of damage and had an armor class at 27. And seriously, they're not going to remember that. They're going to remember those other fights. So when the environment moves, the players move too. All of a sudden, every turn feels like a puzzle or a gamble. It makes combat um, erratic. It makes it unexpected, and it makes it somewhat exciting. So set goals beyond kill everything. Not every fight needs to end in corpses. Give some combat objectives that change the situation. Protect the scholar while they complete the ritual. Escape before the self-destruct timer hits 0. Steal the artifact while dodging guards. Stop the summoning by disrupting all 4 rune pillars. Buy time until reinforcements arrive. One of the most amazing combats I have ever run, I'll finish. When the goal shifts from eliminate everything to solve this problem under pressure, combat becomes story. One of the best combats I ever ran was a Legend of the Five Rings game where 4 samurai stood on a bridge holding back a horde of Oni while a single Shukenja was attempting to do a ritual that would actually lock and close a gate that not allow the Oni in. It meant the players were likely going to die. But these 4 samurai fought on this rickety bridge across a chasm in the Shadowlands, and it was the most enjoyable fight I think I've ever run. The players walked away from it talking about it for, I don't know, months afterwards, and it was just incredible. 3 characters died in that game, and not one of those characters, not one of those players regretted a single moment just from that one fight. So players stop asking how many hit points do I have and start asking how do we win this. You change the dynamic. Instead of becoming a metagaming or a video game kind of feel, you're actually role playing. You're actually giving meaning to a combat, and you're making combats fun. You're making them different. You're making them, unique. Keep it cinematic. Describe action with style and purpose. Combat doesn't need long monologues, but it does need energy. Remember we talked about pacing earlier? Pacing can have a big impact on a combat. You want to make a combat a slog for the players? Make it slow. Make things happen almost in slow motion. You want to make it risky and daring and scary. Make it quick. Make it dynamic. Make it brutal. Use sensory language, the hiss of steam, the crack of ribs, the way the blood hits the marble. Too many D&D games, and I'm going to use D&D because it's a really obvious example. Don't do this. You do 14 hit points of damage. The orc looks at you. I mean, you know, how is that different from you swing your saber, you strike the orc in the ribs, you hear the crack of his ribs, and blood sprays across the marble. I mean, they're completely different combats, right? Describe it. Use sensory language. Really describe what happens. You don't have to be bloodthirsty. You can do it without doing that if that's not what your group likes. Describe outcomes, not just sheer numbers. The blade sinks into the creature's side. It staggers back, bile hissing from a wound. It staggers next to the lantern, knocking it over. A flame begins to sprout. The walls catch on fire. There's so much you can do with just a couple of words of description. Sure, it's still 14 points of damage, but hey, it's a lot better than just saying it's 14 points of damage. Name attacks or describe powers with flair. Yeah, D&D is fantastic at naming abilities, and yet players often don't use it. Get the player to tell you what it is they're doing. Get them to describe it. They might have burning hands. But what if their burning hands has black flame as they strike at their target? That hisses up their arm and then it causes the creature to back away with this black flame burning on it. Make it interesting. Um, Show impact. Enemies should bleed. They should panic. They should roar. Environment should react. Something should change every round. Going back to what I said earlier, that orc that you stabbed in the side who staggered and knocked over the lantern, all of a sudden you got a wall wooden wall frame on fire. All of a sudden you're adding another dynamic to the combat, and the players are, it's becoming cool, and it's becoming different, and it's becoming something they got to think about. They're not just worrying about rolling to hit. They're worrying about, is that flame going to block the exit? How are we going to get out of here? There's only one door, all those sorts of things. So if a player does something cool, reward it, even if the mechanics say otherwise. Yes, I'm telling you to go against the mechanics. If a player does something cool, reward it. Make it happen. Make it have an effect. Make it affect the surroundings. Make it happen, right? It will just add to your combat. It will just add to it. Even if that means it kills your big bad guy in one fell swoop, allow it. Make it have a consequence. Yes, but remember we talked about yes, but or yes, and use them. Narrative momentum is more important than statistical perfection. Don't worry if the big bad guy only had 27 hit points left and somebody only did 21 but did the most coolest thing you've ever seen. Kill him or incapacitate him or whatever. Sometimes it's better just to let the narrative flow rather than wait for that 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or hit points or armor class or whatever. Player does something really cool. You think that's really cool. It might have the added consequence of perhaps the villain is knocked off the bridge and falls into the river below, and they might come back. You give yourself a whole heap more room to move when you allow narrative momentum rather than just relying on statistics. I am actually really guilty of this. I very rarely run a game where all I worry about is the stats. Yeah. You're not the referee for dice. You're the director of an action movie your players star in. Remember that. Combat pacing. Keep it snappy, keep it sharp. Combat drags when turns are too slow. Everyone waits too long to act. The stakes aren't clear. All three of those things can be really problematic. Sometimes you want the turns to be slow, but you're doing it for a very clear purpose. But generally, turns are too slow. Everyone waits too long to act. All the stakes aren't clear. Fix it. How do you fix it? Timers. 6 seconds to decide your move. You let the players know this in session 0. When I'm going to run combat, guys, I'm going to use a 6-second timer. Or at the start of a session, hey guys, I've been reviewing our combats. I'm going to run a 6-second timer. Warn the players, give them warning because that's only fair. But then hold them to it. Hold them to it. Somebody doesn't go 6 seconds, you go, no, you've missed your turn. You'll have to think about what you're doing. The villain does this. Keep it moving. If they stall, narrate the pressure. The cultist raises the blade over you. What do you do? I don't know. I'm not going to. He swings the blade. What happens? So keep it moving. Keep them moving by adding momentum and adding pacing and adding impetus and all of those things. Clarify initiative. Use visual cues or apps to track turns. Keep them moving. I cannot say this enough. If you're going to use a game that uses initiative, have some sort of visual cue or some sort of app. A really common thing that I have been doing in recent times is on my GM screen, I'll have pictures of the players and I'll literally put them in order on my screen from left to right as to who's got initiative. All right. Clarify the initiative. Use something. Give them a token. Give them a dice with their number on it if that's what you need to do. But give them something. Make sure they've got a visual cue for every round. Describe reactions during other turns. Keep the table engaged while they wait. So by that, I mean, how do I describe this? Make sure that when something happens, you're describing a reaction and make sure that the other players who haven't gone yet are aware of that reaction, because it may mean that they change their thoughts in combat, and what that does is it makes combat much more dynamic rather than, yep, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to roll to hit. Well, hang on a minute. That orc's just knocked over the land and caused fire. You've now seen that. You're right near that. You realise that your comrade who was knocked out 2 rounds ago on the ground is in the line of where the actual oil is leaking. What are you going to do? They're going to change their action. They're going to, or they may not. They may continue with their action, but you're giving them the choice, right? And what you're doing is you're again making the combat dynamic. You're making it different. You're making it constantly moving. So, and if the fight is going nowhere, if the fight is just bogged down, boring, it's dragging, you just can't get any traction, kill it. Have the villain escape. Have the villain die. Depends on what the players do. Have the villain drop to his knees and declare that he loves the cleric who he's been watching from afar since they came into the dungeon. Right? End the combat. End it in whatever way you think you can and allow that to continue to drive the narrative. There is nothing to be gained from continuing a combat that is dragging and players are getting bored with. It doesn't win you any brownie points. It doesn't advance your story. It honestly, it just makes it enjoyable for everyone, including you. So if it's not working, end it narratively. If it's gone on long enough to feel climatic, it was climatic. You don't need to play out every last hit point, which is what I said previously. If you feel you achieved what you wanted to achieve from the combat, then you have. End it. So combat isn't just a numbers game. It's a narrative under pressure, a test of character, creativity, and courage in the moment. Make the world move. Make the goals matter. Make the players feel like legends or like they barely escaped with their lives. Either way, it's unforgettable. So, questions, and we will end it after this bit. So, by all means, ask away. How would you approach a situation where one player has been immobilized and can do nothing during their turn, such as say they got banished and can't break the spell? How would you keep them entertained while they can't do anything? Okay, really good question and happens a lot. So let's take immobilized. In almost every game system, immobilized is just a combat mechanic for stopping the player from doing something. In Legend of the Five Rings, if you're immobilized, it just means you take sufficient negatives and things that you can't actually perform an action. However, you can still crawl, you can still move, and you know what? As a GM, it's okay to bend the rules a little bit and let that guy who was immobilized crawl over the space of 2 turns over to the character lying on the floor that the oil is rushing around and slowly begin trying to pull them out. Right? Say they were banished and can't break the spell. Sure, okay. Where were they banished to? That's a whole story in itself. Right? Cut from the combat. Combat gets to an end of turn moment. Have a cut. a climactic cut and cut to where is the banished player? Oops, all of a sudden they're in the 666 layers of hell. Oh God, what do they do? You can keep players entertained if you cut to them, and there is almost no situation I can think of where you can't have them doing something. Even if the rules say they can't do anything, there is generally something. You just have to be a little creative. Um, if they're unconscious and dying, um, what can you do there? Well, there's a few things you can do. Okay, so they're unconscious and dry and dying. Why can't you cut from the combat to a narrative scene where their life is flashing in front of their eyes and they're making choices, or or the spirits come out of their body, and all of a sudden, this could even be D&D. All of a sudden, they're having a moment where they're dying, and they see a shining ray of light, and a god or goddess from the world that they're in appears before them and tells them their work isn't done to get back into their body, and all of a sudden they're back on one hit point, right? As the GM, you can guide whatever narrative you want. You just need to be prepared to improvise and give the players some agency. Let them have a moment. And honestly, some of those moments where players think they're dead or whatever, can be really powerful, and you can do really cool things with them. Also, you can actually also just let them die. Let the character die. And generally what I would say to you is, if you let a player die, a character die, make a damn big deal about it. Make it a sorrowful moment. Make it a moment of tragedy. Get the other players at the end of the turn, when they realize that the cleric they've been traveling with for 3 months has died. Let them sit there and say to them, the character's dead. Do you remember that time when such and such they did such and such? Let them relive. Let them, carry that character as a banner. Let them, fly the flag and talk about how much that character made them laugh, and whatever. Sometimes that can be really, really powerful and bring a group closer together. Sure, the player needs to make a new character, but if you've clarified that in session zero, that death is a real possibility in your game, and I would say to you, in most games, you should make that statement, because it adds a level of uncertainty to the players that makes them play true to form. That was a long-winded answer, sorry. Any other questions? All right. Well, on that, I am going to stop the recording. We can still have a chat if people want, but I'm going to stop the recording at this point. Oh, hang on. Big question. What is your singular piece of GM advice that you absolutely stand by? There's a few. Singular. If I had to pick a singular piece of advice, if it's not fun, why are you playing? It needs to be fun. Fun can only be defined by the GM and players at session zero and subsequent sessions. But if it's not fun, then you shouldn't be playing the game. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.